If AI can do everything from writing novels to designing proteins, what exactly is left that only humans can do? Do we care about the story behind a piece of art, who made it, who suffered for it, when AI can produce the same words or images? Which jobs are really at risk? Is there any such thing as a human advantage in a world where machines can outperform us at almost any measurable task? What does any of this have to do with the plow, or Stephen King's nightmares, or the first shoeshine caught on camera, or Tom Cruise's stunts, or the shortage of air conditioner repairmen, and why hyper-capable AI might actually increase the demand for unexpected jobs? Today, we'll speak with author and technologist Andrew Mayne. Welcome to Inner Cosmos with me, David Eagleman. I'm a neuroscientist and author at Stanford, and in these episodes, we sail deeply into our 3-pound universe to understand how we see the world and what our world might come to look like very soon. When you look around a subway car or a coffee shop, you see people scrolling on their phones with essentially no movement of their bodies except for their thumbs, but inside their skulls, 86 billion neurons are firing away, each neuron as complex as a city, each one alive with electrical storms flickering tens or hundreds of times every second. These vast inner cosmoses are running constant simulations of the world around us, of the future, of each other. And one of the things that makes our species unusual is that our brains are not simply built for getting food or escaping predators. They are finely tuned social prediction engines. A huge amount of the cortex is devoted to thinking about other people, their motives, their reliability, their intentions, their reputations. We carry around mental models of thousands of individuals and organizations, and we constantly simulate possibilities. Like, how would she react if I sent this message? Can I trust this contractor? Is this person over here aligned with my values? And so on. This social simulation machinery is so ancient and so deeply wired that it has shaped everything that we call an economy. I think this goes underappreciated, that markets are so much more than just spreadsheets and supply chains. They are agreements between nervous systems. Economies are built from trust, from storytelling, from reputation, from shared values, and from our search for meaning. Okay, now suddenly into this long human drama steps a new cognitive species, AI. And this is weird because AI doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't have a childhood, but it can process information at extraordinary scale. And it's busy automating tasks that once required human thought. So the question on everyone's mind is, what does this mean for the economy? What happens to our jobs? Will the economy bend or will it break? Will we be replaced or will our skills evolve into something new? Now, the first thing to note is that we have been here before many times. Thousands of years ago, when agriculture was nearly everybody's job, the plow presumably seemed like an existential threat. But as we know, it didn't eliminate human purpose, it expanded it, because the plow freed brains to invent, teaching, governance, philosophy, math, art, and so on. And this pattern kept repeating. Industrial machinery opened up more human creativity, then electricity, then the microprocessor. Every time, the old jobs vanished and new ones emerged that no one could have predicted. I think about this all the time. If you were one of the men who landed on the moon in 1969, you couldn't even have imagined that your kids would graduate with majors in computer science, or you couldn't even imagine the concept of the internet and that a kid might grow up to become a web developer or an app developer or a mobile UX designer or a data scientist or a cloud infrastructure engineer, or go into cybersecurity or become a prompt engineer or a drone cinematographer or an esports athlete. or a VR designer, or a social media influencer. Today, of course, we are catching the wave of another transformation faster than anyone imagined. AI is writing code, it's designing proteins, it's responding to customer inquiries, it's drafting legal language, it's tutoring students, it's accelerating science. Some jobs are going to be automated quickly. These are called the black box jobs by today's guest, where someone receives a signal and sends a standardized output. But new professions will appear, most of which we can't yet name or even conceive of. And the deeper questions reach beyond economics into our psychology, because we need to assess what humans actually want from other humans. What are we willing to outsource, and what are we going to fiercely protect? For example, why does a concert matter more when the guitarist spent decades building calluses? Why do we trust a teacher more when they have lived the very mistakes that we are trying to avoid? I've argued here before that the answer lies in the circuitry of the social brain. We value the story behind a creation. We value the years of effort, the biological limitations, the courage, the vulnerability. AI can mimic outputs, but it can't yet mimic stakes. It can't yet mimic what it means to be a fragile biological creature trying to create something meaningful in a short life. And so on the surface, the question is, will AI destroy jobs? But the deeper version is, how will humans redefine meaning and connection and value in an age when machines can do almost everything else? So to explore this, I sat down with my friend and colleague, Andrew Mayne, who is an extremely interesting person. He is a novelist, an inventor, a very accomplished magician with books and television shows on the subject. And most relevant for today's conversation, he is the original prompt engineer for OpenAI and their first science communicator. He lives right at the intersection of creativity and innovation and AI, so I invited him to the studio to get his take on the future relationship of humans and AI. So Andrew, a lot of people are worried that AI is going to take over all the jobs of humans. So what's your take on this?
I think that we have to think about what we mean by jobs and historically what's happened. If we were in Mesopotamia several thousand years ago and somebody showed you a plow, and at that time, like 99% of everybody was involved in agriculture, a plow would seem like a very scary thing. But because of the plow, we were able to invent things like teaching as a profession, governance, and a lot of the other things that we now consider essential culture. They didn't exist then because we didn't have the time to do that. And they weren't like superfluous things like poetry or art, which have value, but these were things that help build our economy. And I think that we get that every major technological change. If we went back just, 200 years ago to, within the great-great-grandparents' time, like there's actually, I think Zachary Taylor has a grandson that's still alive today, which is like crazy. I mean, he had children late and his son had children late. But in that time of somebody's living today with their grandparent, when 95% of everybody's involved in agriculture, if you talked about the industrialization of agriculture, and that would seem like that would be almost apocalyptic in the change. But that's when things started to happen and shift. It was part of the reason we got rid of slavery. It's part of the reason that we started to think about how everybody sort of has a vital part of our economy.
So if we were just blue skying about the kinds of jobs that will exist 100 years from now, things in analogy to governance and teaching, what could we come up with?
Well, part of it is people often ask, like, what's the job of the future? And if we look at how much jobs have changed in our own lifetime subtly, that we don't realize that. If we went back in time to like the 1980s and we talked to a teacher then and we talked to a teacher today and we told a teacher back then, well, in the future, you're going to spend part of your time in Google Calendar. What's that? Well, it's an electronic spreadsheet for managing time, sort of. You're going to be doing video calls. You're going to be using electronic documents. It would sound like an IT job. It would sound extremely technical, but that's normal. And
it's table stakes now.
Yeah, and you think about that too, is we use these tools all the time. So you and I are on our phones, we're checking messaging, we're checking these stuff. So I think 100 years from now, the value is going to still come in from things where we want people. We like people to teach us. We like people to manage things for us. I trust you. I trust you to manage a thing. Maybe you're going to use a bunch of electronic systems, but I want you to make sure they're working.
That makes sense. One of the things that I've been very interested in is what AI is going to mean for creatives. For example, writers. You and I are both writers of books. And something that I've been happy to see is that people really care about the heartbeat behind the page. So they care that it's a real author who slaved over a keyboard for months or years, rather than, oh, I wrote this book with AI in 500 milliseconds. No one wants to read that, even if the book is identical word for word to your book. And I think that's nice that people care about the heartbeat.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a place for certain kinds. I might be happy with AI textbooks and stuff, but reading about the experience of somebody like you who's actually gone into a lab, gone into the world and tested things, that's way more valuable to me. An example that I use a lot is, one is I love the fact that Stephen King's this kind of crazy guy that lives in Maine. That makes his stories, because this might be a nightmare. That kind of gives it more value. I mean, maybe that's sad that somebody else's terror is my enjoyment, but be as it may. But also Brandon Sanderson, he's a prolific science fiction fantasy author. Brandon is a guy that's very active in the convention circuit. He's got a really wonderful engagement with his fan base. He talks about writing. He shares about writing all the time. He's a very real person. I don't know if you know this, but he did a Kickstarter, and he had 4 books he wrote during the pandemic. It was the most successful Kickstarter of all time. $40 million. $40 million.
Incredible.
The market cap of Barnes & Noble is only $400 million. So basically 10% of the market cap of America's largest retail bookseller.
And why?
I think it's because people like him. They like the guy. I mean, part of what makes, we might get an AI to generate an entire mythology like Lord of the Rings, but the fact that J.R.R. Tolkien was a guy that spent all this time studying, trying to create an English mythology, gives it value.
Yeah, exactly. So if an AI wrote exactly Brandon Sanderson's books, we wouldn't care about it as much. So that's the good news.
Some people might. I think there will be a mixed ground, but I think a lot of us who care more, who flip to the back jacket to go, who wrote this? There's a reason we put that on there.
Yeah. What's interesting is that it won't be too long before AI starts writing books and faking the author bio and an author picture. So we'll have to have other ways of verification, like in-person tours.
Well, we've dealt with, there are publishers that have house authors. There are I know of some authors that are famous authors that are no longer writing their books, and they have other ghostwriters doing that. So I'd say we've been doing that for a while, but, I think you're right. There's going to be people who aren't going to care, and I think that's fine.
One of the things that's a really cool question is, what will authors do to distinguish themselves from AI? So by analogy, when the camera got invented, visual painters panicked. But what they ended up doing was moving into areas that the photograph could not do, like impressionism and cubism and so on. And they ended up, surviving and making new kinds of art that no visual painter would have predicted at the time when the camera debuted. So the question is, what kind of books will we write?
I use, when I give talks, one of the examples I give is the Gur's first photograph of people, right? The first photograph of people is 1837, 1838. And what happened was accidental. Back then, you had to leave a camera aimed at the sidewalk. You have to leave the shutter open long enough because it took so long for enough photons to register on the film. The idea of capturing people seemed crazy because nobody would stand that long enough. But a guy got his shoe shined. So the shoe shiner, and he got captured in the photograph. And you think about what that would mean at the time. You saw how painters realized they could go in different directions. Their job wasn't just to try to recreate reality, it was to interpret it. But imagine going back in time and saying, hey, listen, not only that, but in a few decades, we're going to have motion pictures. What's a motion picture? That's hard to explain. And explain that, 100 years later, we were going to have these productions that were dwarfed in size than you have, or today, where you get the end credits for Avengers Endgame is longer than the number of people who were in the United States Navy in 1837. The budget, not adjusted dollars, but the budget and just dollar for dollar was greater than the U.S. Treasury, and the scale of art got so much bigger. So for writers, I think that part of what comes into is that you get to it's not just the text space between the pages of the book. I think it becomes bigger.
Like what?
We're doing a podcast.
Okay, right.
This is part of what is the Eagleman legendarium. Part of it's this, part of it's this, part of it's that. I think that we start looking at that. How much time do you have to spend on the things you don't like doing as an author, like revisions, little notes, things like this? How much would happen if you had AI to free you up from that to spend more time creating and engaging with people?
So let me just make sure I got the analogy though. So with bands, the release of the album, that was the big thing. And then they'd make their money selling the album. Then that changed with Napster and so on, where going on the road was the thing and the album was just the calling card so that people would show up. The economics of it changed.
Well, it's sort of, but it changed for some of the people at the top. For other bands, going on the road never actually was a payoff because the record labels would still hold on to it. And now you're in this weird phase where like with Spotify and with streaming, where you have some people making a lot of money on streaming, some people not. I would say record company economics are always sort of weird. So
right, but it's the going on the road that mattered. It's the showing
that's
up
how you build
in
your audience.
person.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the part that for a while was not a big deal in music and then became a big deal. I suspect that it's going to be the same in, let's say, writing, where it's not just sitting and tapping out the book in solitude, but it's going and doing the talks and the tours and the podcasts.
I do. Every time I launch a book, I'll do a live sessions. I'll go hop on video and talk to people about that. I used to do go to bookshops and stuff, but I said I can reach more people if I just hop on a video stream and talk to people and be accessible. And again, I think there's going to be different things for different people. I think that, not some people can be reclusive. I think sometimes if their work just creates its own community around it, that can work.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to the big picture then. So what is going to be the influence of AI on the economy in terms of jobs? What jobs are going to disappear first? Which ones are going to be unaffected?
I think the highly networked jobs, or where people are happy to have a person in there or need a person to be in it, are always going to be highly valuable.
What's an example?
If you are a person who makes a purchasing decision for a company and you have to decide who to work with, and you need to look at contractors or somebody with a really good reputation, and that really comes to talking to, let's say you're a contractor and you have to figure out who are you going to get your building supplies from. You're going to want to talk to somebody and find out the reliability, because that information's not just available out there. That's something you have to sort of figure out, like a little bit more deeper sort of connection to that.
Although we can certainly imagine a time when my AI agent talks to this company's AI agent and all the data
but
of how reliable. Well, that's right. But all the data is out there about the reliability of that company.
But we make that assumption, though, that we put everything out there. So a lot of stuff about other people that you won't share both via social media or whatever that's inside. You share with your friends. You share with high trust people, but you don't actually make, because that has value. And so I think that's part of, like, you look at certain things that continue on, like, we both have literary agents, right? And they have a better understanding of, you could theoretically, I could have a ChatGPT negotiate a contract, but it's going to tell me, like, well, this is really what happened at this publishing house, or this what's really happened there. So I think there's a lot of places where we forget how much information is locked up in our heads and how much of it's based upon trust.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things that fascinates me is social neuroscience, which is a new subfield, which really concentrates on trust and integrity and reputation of other people. It turns out the way we've traditionally studied the brain is we say, look, this is how the visual system works, this is how audition works, this is how movement works. But what that overlooks is that a massive amount of the circuitry of the brain is about other people. Mm-hmm. And we have thousands of models in our heads of other people. Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I know a bunch of people in common. And for each of us, we've got a little model of that person. It's like a little, mannequin. And, how would that person respond if I said this or that, or I called them and did that? It's weird how many people we can simulate pretty well. So we're living in this world where we care so much about other people. And I agree with you that a lot of that information is not the type of thing that AI can pick up on, because it's very subtle how humans interact with other humans as opposed to just data that can be gathered.
Yeah, when I lived in Japan, and one of the things I saw there up close was a lot of like how Asian business culture works. And you can have two companies that seem that they're going to do a partnership that are very much the same on paper, but then they want to hang out socially. And that happens here too, is that I have an investment fund and we get some of our partnerships come from, they look at the paper, they look at the data room and go, this is great, but let's hang out and let's talk to each other and see if our values align. I think we forget too that our economy is not really the exchange of dollars, it's the exchange of values. And not every value is easily converted into a dollar point. And like there are people that you have a lot of ways in which you can spend your time. And there are probably more efficient ways that could be more financially profitable towards you, but you choose not to because you say, I get more value out of this than here. And we're all like that. And I think we forget that when we think about automating the economy. And I think that there are going to be parts of it we do, but an example I'll give you is that I did an interview with Jakob Pohatsky, who is the head scientist at OpenAI. And Jakob is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, one of the smartest people in the world, in my opinion. And we were talking about a teacher he had. He went to a magnet school for computer science. And I said, we're seeing AI as this wonderful tutor. Do you see this point where AI replaces teachers? And Jakob, understand, whose job is to get AI to be as useful and as widely deployed as possible, laughed at that idea because he pointed out his favorite teacher inspired him. And it inspired him because that person had a real experience. And it's one thing, ChatGPT can be as, sycophantic or whatever we talk about it as you want. End of the day, it starts to feel like, okay, but, how do you really feel? And having real experience can make something and give us more value. And I think that's something we overlook. That's why I think that classroom AI is going to be super beneficial. We're already seeing the examples that is extremely helpful. But at the end of the day, I want to have a human there with real experience that's also going to encourage me and tell me. Like, I love memory techniques. One of my favorite teachers is Anthony Mativier. He does things on memory on YouTube and whatnot. And I can ask ChatGPT about memory, which I do a lot, but listening to somebody who actually tried the methods is much more useful to me in the long run.
Why? Because you get to hear what went wrong and what his foibles were.
Yeah, it's taking coaching advice from somebody who never played football versus somebody who actually played the game. And memory methods, like somebody who actually has real experience doing the thing, that's got a lot of value. And I think that we think about like how much of what we want is, I need proof that it worked. And the ultimate laboratory is human experience when it comes to trying to figure out what to do with your own experience.
Yeah, good call. My 13-year-old boy, I asked him, hey, if there were a tutor of Aristotle, knows everything Aristotle knows, plus everything else, would that be really interesting for you? And he said, no, not at all. And I said, why? My 13-year-old is really smart, but he wasn't interested because he said, I want to spend time with my friends. And that's much more interesting than sitting with Aristotle and asking questions and getting ChatGPT answers back from that model.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I think that you have to figure out where you want to get those things from. And end of the day, he wants to be human.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so when we think about AI affecting the economy, what do you see then, given what we talked about, that we care about other humans, all the social networking, that's not going away. Does it get enhanced? Does it get suppressed, turned in a different direction?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think like anything, there's good and there's bad. I think that, when you have the opportunity to, use these tools to sort of amplify yourself, it's great. If you just try to say, I'm going to outsource everything I do to the tool, that's going to be a challenge. And I look at jobs that are at risk, I describe as like black box jobs. Anything where you just get an email in and you send something out and nobody cares who does it, that's really headed towards replacement from AI. And we see that with like call centers and things like that, where it's really, if it doesn't matter who's in that role, and we're going to see that. You're going to find fewer people at fast food restaurants, but also those are jobs too that the average time somebody stays on one of those jobs is like 18 months. Those are jobs that are more of a rung on a ladder. So I certainly think that bottom parts of the ladder, we might see changes there, but I also think that we do invent new rungs at the top, which is what we've done historically. I think that we're going to have more science. I've talked to people who are in AI who talk about AI scientists, say, what happens when AI replaces scientists? I think we're going to have more scientists because one human scientist will be able to do so much more than they could before. I think with teachers too, we need more teachers. I would like more teachers in my life.
Yeah, I'm amazed when I look back at scientific projects like William Bragg, who spent years crystallizing the first protein and figuring out the structure of it. Took him, 5-10 years. He won the Nobel Prize for that. But now AlphaFold does, 300,000 proteins in the blink of an eye. Everything speeds up like that, and that gives the opportunity for people to work on projects like AlphaFold and go much faster.
Well, can I give you an example about that?
Please.
So last night, I was over at the Chan Zuckerberg Institute, which is Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan's institute for research in biology. And I have some friends with a company called Evolutionary Scale working on a protein model. They had a model called ESM3 and models that were able to predict protein structures. They got basically acquired by BioHub now, which is the institute runs that, to basically oversee, and help deploy and help move faster with AI in the biology space.
So Chan Zuckerberg took that company on.
They brought them on board. Alex Reeves was the head of Evolutionary Scale, is now going to be running BioHub, which is exciting. But one of the things I think about is that, they're looking at how they deploy AI, whatever. You walk around the facility and then you see several rooms with really sophisticated electron microscopes. And you realize they need more of these. They need more people running these things. We need way more of that. And even if they had upstairs an AI scientist that was able to do this stuff, you start to see how much more data could we get? And you just see that it's not like I have an AI scientist solved. It's like I have an AI scientist. Now science really begins.
Oh, that's interesting, because you could, in theory, automate all the electron microscopy, and you can imagine ways that becomes like a dark factory where it's running itself, where the AI generates hypotheses, tests all the stuff. But
humans, how many experiments would you be running right now if you could just pull up ChatGPT and say, hey, I want to go run this experiment?
Lots. Yeah. Okay. And your point is then lots of other people would come into science to do that as well.
Yeah. Your bottleneck isn't you don't have enough ideas for things you want to experiment. Yeah. Your bottleneck is the resources.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. What's interesting is I wonder often if there is sort of an answer or an end to science where we say, okay, look, we've got this in place, that in place. We know these forces, that structure. We're done. We're out of here. I have my doubts because, in fact, I just did a podcast on this recently with the particle physicist Daniel Whiteson about this question of, is the way that we construct the laws of physics, does it have to do with our sensation and our cognition, our Umwelt, meaning what we can sense in the world? And if you came across aliens who saw a totally different world, would they possibly come up with different laws of physics and not use fields, but they, have a very different way of seeing it? So maybe that's where science will go, is looking at alternative ways that we could have talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a point at which we say we've solved all the things that you can explain to our monkey brains, but we haven't solved for everything. Like there's going to be things as the universe gets older, things in which conditions will change and whatnot. We look at this in life sciences. I have some friends that are involved in AI and life sciences who are very excited and who are very, very bullish on where this is going to head. Like, what happens when we cure health and we don't need doctors anymore? I'm like, we're going to be worrying about longevity research on Mars. We're going to worry about long distance travel. Like, how do you maintain brain function when you're 500 years old? Like, I don't see those questions ending because we're just going to expand. The Greeks thought that, maybe science is pretty solvable because they looked at a very simple framework, but they weren't asking bigger questions about a lot of things. They just thought these things couldn't even be answered. And now we're like, why not? What's exciting about watching this happen is that when you talk to people in biology, they tell you what proteins can do. When you start to figure out how you can start structuring proteins to do things like break down plastics or attack certain parts of cancer, it's a very, very interesting area that we're just now starting to see. And I think there's a lot of optimism here that we're going to see things rapidly develop, because we saw what happened to language model space. There's a lot of challenge in getting life sciences data inside of these models, but we see really good signs that that's going to happen.
Okay, so what do you think in terms of what AI will be able to and won't be able to do?
I think that any task that you can measure, that somebody could walk into a room and take a test, AI will eventually be able to do that. I think rapidly so. I think that's very likely the case. I think we're going to see a fast follow for robotics. I think we're going to see probably the next 18 months some really interesting things. We've already seen some things with kind of machine intelligence and problem solving. But there's one thing, it's one thing to have like a highly intelligent system. It's another thing to have a system that works within an entire ecosystem or culture or society. And we just often forget about how important that is, of where value comes from that. So I also think that, like we talked about before with authors, is I might have an AI that's an incredible guitarist. Am I going to be excited to see that perform? Because the problem with AI is that because we often value creativity because of the limitations, but when there's no limitation to the amount of effort or energy or resources that goes into an AI system, an AI guitarist would be like, well, of course, that's cool. I can listen to a CD and it do the same thing. But I want to know that this biological system called a human had to spend 50 years to get there to do that. And that creates more value because it's not just the outcome, it's what went in to make it. I think a lot of people have anxiety about like AI, replacing their job and what they do. And I think that we have to sort of step back and often remember that a job is about an outcome, and how you get that outcome is going to change over time. It's changed historically. And often the thing that you're trying to do is create some sort of value, and it's not always economic, or it can be put into economic terms, but we have to sort of think back, like, what is the value of a book, and put $20 on the spine of a book and say, this book's worth $20. I've read books that if you told me what I was going to get out of it, I would have paid a lot more. I've had businesses with friends that we made money, but really the experience of working with everybody was way more valuable. And I think that people have anxiety about this future of like, what happens when robots do everything? Like, I don't think it'll be as fun. And I don't think it's going to create as much value as people think that it will. And something I mentioned to you before we recorded was, there's a statistic that's roughly like 40% of all internet traffic after 6 p.m. is like Netflix. And that's because of Squid Games, and K-pop Demon Hunters. And when you take those things out, those things that are really valuable because people like them and people created them, what's the value of the internet after 6 p.m.? Well, we just lost 40% of the value right there.
Okay, but what about AI film? Do you think people will spend their time watching AI film instead of K-pop Demon Hunters and Squid Games?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I don't think anybody under 6 is going to care, how it was created. I think that we're going to really value certain things. Whenever Tom Cruise wants to market a Mission Impossible movie, part of the PR campaign is about the stunt that he performed. The last movie he did, he hung outside of in an airplane. He did some airplane stunts. He's done some other really cool stuff. When they did Top Gun, the Top Gun Maverick, they made it a point of putting the actors into actual real planes so we could get their reactions. And this was added value. If we watched a PR video talking about, look how great these AI stunt doubles are, which we got like back in the 90s, and we're like, we don't care. That's not as interesting to us as the fact that a human really did something special. I think there are going to be films where it's going to be three high school students are going to make a movie using AI, and we're like, this is amazing. And then we're going to still want, Guillermo del Toro to hate on AI and go build these wonderful, lavish productions where he does it his way, like a craftsperson. I think it's both.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart way of looking at it is in the mixture model of what the future is going to look like. So if we're just looking purely at economic value, where do you think the biggest changes are going to be there in the next 5-10 years?
The one thing that's happened that people have overlooked is that every 6 months or so, you get better answers from ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude when it comes to medical questions, right? And we've had the first time in history, medical information's gotten cheaper year over year. And that we can't really, I think, overstate how significant that is. You think about that, like getting competent medical information, it gets better every year and it gets cheaper every year. And that's going to apply to a lot of things. And so I think that when we start to think about, what does that mean? Well, other kinds of information are get cheap. Really great answers are going to be less expensive. And some people say, well, great, who's going to need doctors? I think we're going to actually want to use doctors for a lot more areas of our life. You might be able to spend more than 2 minutes with your doctor now. Nobody says I spend too much time talking to my doctor. Everybody's like, I don't get enough time. And I think that we're going to start to look at like, okay, what do we really want? I think that some areas that are easily automated, I've mentioned before, call centers, things like this, yeah, that part may go away. And we're going to have to start thinking about encouraging more people to take on the kinds of roles that we want to spend more time with. We need more nurses. We need more people we need more people who build things. Like, people, I've got into this discussion on Twitter where somebody says, well, what would you tell an air conditioning repair person whose their job is going to be, threatened? And I'm like, I don't know if you know this, but we're running out of AC repair people right now because not enough people are coming into the workforce to replace the ones that are retiring. And that's true of a lot of these other industries right now. And even when we get to robotics, that's going to be exciting because nobody steps outside and goes, oh, everything's perfect. What would I fix in this world? We go, there's so many things we could fix, so many things we could repair, so many things we could make better. So I think that we're going to be thinking a lot more about how more people could become builders, how more people could create things that should exist. exist. And I think that's where I have to think about, like, from a career point of view. And one of the things I tell people is, like, think about working in groups, think about your ability to work with other people, create groups, think about people, think about kind of problems you can collectively try to solve together.
It's interesting to see that blue-collar jobs are the ones that everyone knows are going to survive: the plumbers, the electricians, the air conditioner repairmen. And we certainly wouldn't have expected that. It does make me wonder, though, if in 100 years from now, air conditioners get designed in such a way that they are meant for robots to fix them instead of having to get a human in them.
I absolutely think I think that we're going to see robotics do a lot of those things in a shorter term. But I also think of the things that we think are possible to build right now in the middle of this data center build out, building new data centers and goals like Sam Altman's talked about, building 1 gigawatt of compute per week. And that's basically a city-sized amount of, or city-sized amount of energy per week because of what's possible there, which means that, what is the big part of the future economy? It's going to come down to energy production. It's going to come down to compute. And I think a lot of the jobs we think about are going to be both supporting building that and also making use of that. So, I think that, AC repair, things like this, those jobs are probably, I think that people who have those jobs right now aren't going to have a problem. And I think that younger people coming into it are going to have a broader view of it. And I think that the AC repairman, a 15-year rare person 15 years from now, they're going to maybe be in charge of a fleet of robots, and their job is to be accountable. Their job is to tell them, like, yes, we got the work done as we build, Megaplex Energy Project number 49 on the moon.
Nice.
There are people that I know and I really respect in AI who worry about job displacements, which I worry, but they think, like, what happens when AI can do just about everything? And I'm like, we grow, we get bigger. If you imagine AI becoming highly capable, you have to also imagine the economy becoming highly scaled. And when that happens, you're actually going to grow so fast, there won't be enough people to do the things you want to get done. From, working in, a data center, to working in a cafeteria, to make sure that you have, great sushi, to figuring out what you do with all this compute. And if you really imagine what happens when we're super ambitious, that's amazing. And I think if you looked at the founding fathers of the United States, if they looked at the scale at which we did things today, it would be unfathomable. And we think that, people often think of the future as just shiny clothes and robots doing stuff, when really the future's bigger. Like, we look back, I tell people, if you look back 100 years ago, the first thing you'd realize is, we're poor. Back then, 100 years ago, you'd feel like everybody was pretty poor. That's for 100 years from now. People look back at us and think, you guys were poor. But building that future. And
you died young and you had all kinds of problems. Yeah. Do you have an opinion about universal basic income?
Other than it's a terrible and necessary idea? No.
Tell me why.
I mean, I'm all for, as you can lower the cost of things. The problem when people talk about universal healthcare is that the cost of it accelerates faster than the GDP does. And no matter whatever you come from political side of the argument, you have to address the fact that this thing gets faster than your economy can afford it. Then it's hard to make that sustainable. I think there's a world where the economy grows so fast that you can have a different conversation about that. When it comes to UBI, because you think that people won't be needed in the economy, I don't think that's going to be the case. And that's a scary place to be when you say that, 8 billion humans are, an ancillary to what the world is. I don't think that, I have trouble fathoming that being true. And also it's uncomfortable to think about that being true, because once you say that they're not necessary, bad things happen. I think that I'm all for ideas and ways in which we make sure everybody gets their needs met. Nobody worries about housing. Nobody worries about healthcare. Nobody worries about food. I'm all for solutions for that. But when we think that there's just not going to be any jobs in the future, I think historically that's not true. It's also, I bring this up like, okay, so we can come up with a super advanced AI, but you're telling me we can't ask it to find out what's still useful work for people. Like, it won't be smart enough to figure out new things. And we've continuously invented new jobs. Like I brought up before, it's entertainment, which you would think be one of the first things to go, just gets bigger. And like education, we need more teachers. Like, I think that as we live longer, healthier lives, one of the ways we're going to want to avoid boredom is we're going to want to continue our education. We're going to go learn from these things, and we're going to learn from people who actually went there and did it. Do you want to learn about Egyptian, mythology from somebody who never went to Egypt? Do you want to learn about practicing medicine from somebody who ever treated a patient? And so I'm very, very bullish on the idea that we're going to need lots more people in our economy.
I was just hanging out with a friend of mine from high school. We graduated together. And I was thinking about the fact that what I do and what he does and what essentially everyone we know in Silicon Valley does, these jobs didn't exist when we were graduating high school. We couldn't have imagined the titles of these jobs. And so my question is, for education currently, if you're thinking about junior high kids and high school kids, what do you see as the important things that we should be teaching them, given that we are not training them for jobs that we know of?
So in 2000, I wanted to get into AI. I really wanted to find a way into that, right? Because I knew that was the future. Like, how could I have this? And I decided this late in life comparatively for other people. And in 2019, OpenAI published, they did a tweet and they talked about their model GPT-2. And if you look at like one of the most upvoted responses was mine at the time going, this is really amazing. I guess I'm out of work as a novelist. Any suggestions on what I should do? I had no idea a year later, I'd be the world's first person employed as a prompt engineer. Because what happened was that intersection of language, and I had an interest in AI, but I knew a lot about language. All of a sudden, those two things collided. And I think that for people right now looking at what they want to do in the future, take the things you're passionate about right now and ask, how does AI make this better? Or how does AI make it worse? And I think that you don't assume like, well, AI is going to replace this. Like, no, AI is going to change it. So, I spend time talking to college kids, and one of the things that concerns me is that a number of kids in computer science programs aren't even taught how to use AI code tools.
Yeah.
I think it's important to learn the fundamentals, but when they're not even taught to use those tools, and there was a headline in a newspaper a few weeks ago that came out like, oh, this person, she got a degree in computer science, but nobody will hire her. I'm like, I bet she never learned to use these tools, and that's why she can't get it. It's not her fault. It's literally the institution she paid money to. So for students, one of the things that was really interesting, I did a talk at Santa Clara last week, and Santa Clara University is interesting because I've interacted with those kids for a couple years now, and I've noticed they become much more entrepreneurial. Like the ones in the AI clubs, they're actually starting their own companies. Some are actually raising money while they're in their dorm rooms. And I asked, why is this? And one of the kids said, well, we're not so sure that there's going to be a job for us. So we want to be more self-reliant. We decided we're going to create our own work. We're going to create our own need. And I think, one, a little scary, they feel that, but that's very honest. And I'm was very happy to see their reaction to this wasn't hopelessness. It was like, fine, if you don't have a place for us, you can't tell us our place in the future. We're going to create our place in the future.
I think that's great for those kids with the personality who are willing to do that. The majority of students, though, might feel quite nervous about that.
But how do we, I agree. How do we get them to that? I think that a lot of entrepreneurs don't even realize that till later life, till necessity. And I think that, and not everybody has to be an entrepreneur, but I do think that like, my advice is like what I did, like I wanted to get into tech and I saw the people at OpenAI. I said, I like what you kids are doing. Can I help you out? And it worked out great.
It's nice. Yeah, Goethe had said the most important bequeaths that a parent can give their child is two things, roots and wings. And I interpret that in the educational context as roots being critical thinking, really teaching students how to do critical thinking, and wings being creative thinking, how to be really creative. Because that's all, when I think about my students at Stanford that I'm teaching, that's the only thing that I'm telling them that's going to stay true 20 years from now, is how can they think through a problem and how can they be really creative, meaning take stuff they've learned before and remix it, bend it, break it, blend it, build new things out of it. Because I think it doesn't matter whether the computer science students are learning coding or whether they're learning AI tools, because in 5 years, it's all going to be something else. It's going to be, super AI tools.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I like, to me, if you ask me to describe coding, to me, it's like to look at a system and figure out how to give it the minimal set of instructions to get it to do something, right? That's how I approach prompting. That's how I approach a lot of things. And I think that, and you have to figure out what those tools are going to be, and you're right. But if you are a critical thinker, you adapt really quite well to this. You understand, oh, the AI does this part, it's good at this, bad at this, now I'm going to use this. I think a lot of people kind of like fetishize the tool itself and think, well, can I just use this thing and that's the way I do it? And it's like, no, it's about the outcome. And I think it's, if you know what your goal is about the outcomes and not just knowing which Python function to use, you're going to be better suited for the future.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I'm so excited about, for example, AI is teaching critical thinking by being debate partners. So one-on-one debate partners, you take some side of a hot button issue, the AI takes the other side, you debate back and forth, it grades you on how well you argue. Then you switch sides and it grades you how well you do the other side. And that kind of thing is the kind of thing that no teacher would ever have time to do for each student. But this will be, it's a perfect tool for really teaching critical thinking.
And it's safe too, because you have what's like debate is a great thing for students to do, but like debate organizations have been so captured by political correctness that students can opt out of arguing alternate points of view, which the problem is the purpose of this was to understand other points of view, and that they become intellectually weak from that. The beauty of AI is, because part of it's the fear too. It's like, I don't want somebody to take me out of context, even though this is supposed to be a safe space. But when you're having a private conversation, the chatbot, you're like, okay, let me explain my point of view on, let me have to defend this point of view I disagree with. Then it feels safe. You're not as worried that all of a sudden it'll be out of context.
Oh, I love that. That's great. And when it comes to creativity, I think there's a real opportunity for AI to just feed us a broader diet. All creativity is absorbing what we see in the world and then remixing that. And, when you look at music around the world, Beethoven certainly could have written music as they did in Japan at the same time or in Nigeria at the same time, or whatever, but he didn't the music was different in all these places. Why? Because he absorbed just a small amount of what was in his culture, and so did the Japanese or the Nigerians. So what we have nowadays, really ever since the advent of the internet, is a much broader diet. But what AI gives us is a broader diet still, where we can get it to do remixes and give us things that really stretch the fence lines of our thinking. And that's great, because that's the student's diet. And then the key, I think, is to make them present in person so they can work with the AI to do whatever they're doing. And then they present to their class and they're explaining all these different things about how the new economy could run on this other planet and the type of people and whatever. That it's such an opportunity for expanding creativity beyond what we ever got in school. That was my interview with Andrew Mayne. This conversation pushed back a bit against the default anxiety that AI equals unemployment, because the story is more richly textured when we ground it in history, economics, psychology, and questions about what the human brain actually seeks. At least historically, the fact is, when you automate the bottom rungs of the economic ladder, humans climb upward. The plow didn't eliminate work. It created governance and mathematics and engineering and poetry. Industrial agriculture didn't collapse society. It helped dismantle slavery and create new professions. So the same is likely with AI. What surfaced from our conversation is that the jobs most at risk are the black box jobs, where a person receives inputs and sends standard outputs, and the identity of the worker doesn't matter. Those jobs are probably going to vanish. But the roles that depend on trust, reputation, lived experience, mentorship, inspiration, these might become more valuable, not less. Because through the neuroscience lens, I think we can say that human beings are creatures of story, not efficiency. We don't choose books only for their sequences of words. We choose them for the heartbeat behind the pages. We don't choose teachers because they have access to zeros and ones that we want to know. We choose them because they've lived actual experiences and can guide us around the pitfalls that they once fell into. As Andrew pointed out, even the chief scientist of OpenAI doesn't believe that AI will replace teachers, because inspiration isn't really a commodity, it's relational. And no matter how knowledgeable an AI tutor becomes, it can't replicate the emotional texture of a person who has wrestled with ideas, who has failed, learned, grown, and now offers that experience to others. Another theme that surfaced is the expansion of creativity. As I mentioned in the conversation, painting didn't die when photography arrived. Instead, painters expanded into new directions like Impressionism and Cubism and Pointillism and Surrealism. And I suggest writers are not going to go away now that AI can write fluent text. Instead, writers will invent new forms of storytelling, new modes of audience engagement, new performance ecosystems around their work. And Andrew raised the possibility that accelerating tools in science like AlphaFold won't eliminate scientists, but it might multiply them. When one researcher can do a year of research work in a day, that massively expands the frontier and opens the door for more people to join the field because it increases the number of experiments that we can imagine, and therefore the number of people we need to build them and run them and interpret them. In other words, the surprising possibility is that the future economy may not need fewer people. It may need more builders, more tinkerers, more craftspeople, more teachers, more creative thinkers, more scientists, more hands to run the experiments, and more minds to shape the meaning of what we discover. Which brings us back to the brain. For all its computational power, it's not built for perfect efficiency. It's built for meaning and imagination and social connection. It's built to ask not just what can I do, but what is worth doing. And this is where humans will continue to shine. The jobs of the future are not going to be the ones we can list today, just like no one a generation ago might have predicted your job title now. The next wave of professions are going to emerge from the collision between human creativity and machine capability. Our kids are going to grow up into jobs that don't yet exist, using tools we haven't invented to solve problems we haven't yet imagined. So our job is to cultivate the tasks of the brain, ours and theirs, that will always matter: critical thinking and creative thinking, roots and wings. So as we move into this AI-accelerated era, the best question isn't just, will AI take our jobs, but instead, what will we choose to do with the extraordinary new landscape that AI opens up for us? Go to eagleman.com/podcast for more information and to find further reading. Join the weekly discussions on my Substack and check out and subscribe to Inner Cosmos on YouTube for videos of each episode and to leave comments. Until next time, I'm David Eagleman, and this is Inner Cosmos.